Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. And today's guest expert is Charlie Gilkey. Charlie is an author, entrepreneur, philosopher, Army veteran, and renowned productivity expert. You can see why I want him on the show. He is the founder of Productive Flourishing, where he helps professional creatives, leaders, and changemakers take meaningful action on work that matters. And I love his new book. I've got it sitting right here on my desk. I can't wait to jump in. Start Finishing, How to Go From Idea to Done. And today he is our Modern Leadership guest expert. Charlie, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm super pumped to be here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Man, there's so much cool stuff going on right now. I love your book. I love what you're talking about. I need you in my life. That's why we're bringing you on the podcast. But before we jump into all this productivity stuff, give us a little background of who you are on a personal level.
Who I am on the personal level? Yeah, so you kind of commented on, all the things that I'm working on in the background. And, I guess the easiest way to say it here is like imagine sort of like a mad scientist put a philosopher, a army veteran, and an entrepreneur into a crock pot and sort of stewed. I would be the guy that jumped out, right? And the reason I teach about productivity and personal development is just one of those things that I'm constantly working on and improving. So I do a lot of the work myself. What didn't make the bio is I'm a very amateur musician. So I'm a singer-songwriter and, I do a lot of personal training when it comes to working out and things like that. So yeah, I'm just, I love to live life in a really full way.
Well, tell me, so you live in Portland. How is Portland as a scene for aspiring, young, new artists that play music?
Ooh, the musician. So again, I'm amateur. I have no intent on actually that scene, but it is a good music scene. I don't know that it's quite as good as say like an Austin, but it can be a very cool place, especially if you're into sort of, most broadly speaking, sort of alt and prog rock. It's a great place for that. So yeah, that's where I put it in that.
Yeah, I love the city. Very cool city. But alas, let's jump right into this book because there is so much I want to talk to you about because I feel like you wrote this book for me. I'm one of these guys that comes up with ideas every day. I mean, every time I blink, I'm coming up with an idea. But the goal of the book, this Start Finishing, is to get us past idea and into fulfillment, into finishing what we started. So tell us, where did you get the idea? Why did you see this as an important book at this time?
Well, part of it is because I've had so many great conversations with entrepreneurs and executives and change makers and nonprofit folks, and we love really to talk about the big ideas and the strategies and things like that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to our ability to get our projects done. And I originally started this journey because I was simultaneously an Army officer and completing my PhD in philosophy. And I just noticed that Phil sophomoric at the time because I was like, 26, 27. I was like, I'm not able to get it all done. I need to figure out what's going on. It's like, yo, bro, you've got two careers going at the same time. So maybe start there. But, I started it. And what I noticed is like the productivity literature tended to be really granular, really sort of focused on hacks and next actions and things like that. And the personal development literature tended to be much higher level, focusing on vision and principles and values and things. And both are great, except our challenge lies in this middle, messy world of projects. And it turns out that finished projects, are the bridge that take you from your current world, your current life, your current work, and build you into this future world that you want to live in, this best life, your best work, wherever you want to go. You get there by finished projects. And so, and another thing I'll say here, Jake, is when I say projects, I mean anything that takes time, energy, and attention, not just your economic or work projects, but the work of your lives. And I think one of the major challenges that we face is we over-prioritize and overcommit to our economic work and hope that we have some time to squeeze the work of our lives into it as kind of an after effect, but there's not enough space to go around.
And you know what I find that happens with that for me personally is I find that when I'm at work, mentally I'm not there. And then I go home and I'm like, yes, I finally got home. And then I spend my time thinking about, well, I got to do this and tomorrow, and let me get out my note-taking app and take some notes for things that I'm going to do tomorrow. And it almost feels like I'm not present where I need to be.
Yeah, I call that the negative middle ground between work and play. There's a positive middle ground between work and play, but the negative middle ground between work and play or work and life is where you're neither really working nor you're neither really living or playing. And that's a terrible place to be because, as you mentioned, you're never fully present, fully engaged with the domain of your life that you're in. And so it's far better to make space and time for the different aspects of your life. And absolutely, one of the things I would say there is being able to see the work of your life as projects and giving it the due time and treating it like it was a project as far as planning it, as far as prioritizing it, as far as getting it on your schedule can help with finding that peace and contentment in being where you are.
So let's clarify this definition of project, because I think I see where you're going, which is, as opposed to kind of going with the flow, it's actually being proactive. It's thinking about it. It's planning time to do different things. But tell me kind of your philosophy behind this project idea.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it, but like I can give some examples of projects to see what I mean, like cleaning out that closet of doom that we all have, where we just cram stuff into it, hoping that we'll get to it one day and we don't.
That's my wife's. I don't have one of those.
Yeah, you don't have one of those, but that's a project. It's going to take time, energy, and attention to get through, and it's not just going to be a 15-minute task, but also moving, selling your house, buying a new house, or, moving apartments, that's a project. Getting married, getting divorced, having kids, getting kids out of the house, those are all projects.
Do you define it as somewhat having a beginning and an end, like clearly defined? We can see how we get into this, and we can also see what our destination is going to be, even though that destination may be just a mile marker on a much bigger route. A project is really something that you can see. There's a noticeable conclusion.
Yeah, there is a beginning, middle, and end. What I want to make room for is doing laundry every week. It's technically a project. It's just a recurring project. And so, again, the reason I want to put that all on the deck is because I think many people's starting point is like, I'm not productive. I got to be more, I got to get more done. But they're not thinking about like the laundry and the errands and the chore and the commutes and the meetings and all those things, which when you really think about it, it's like, oh, all of those things are pulling at this limited time, energy, and attention that I have available. And there are some things that get done just out of routine. Like we take the trash out on Thursday because that's the day the trash runs, right? So it's not a big thing for us. But when we look at those Quadrant 2 aspects of our life, and this is, going back to Stephen Covey and the important but not urgent things, what so often happens is the projects that are Quadrant 2, important but not urgent, in both our life and our work, are the ones that we're not prioritizing or we're not getting any progress on.
And as I think about like the Stephen Covey quadrants, and I think about kind of what you were just talking about, I'm almost more concerned about the urgent but not necessarily important, because I think as a leader, as an owner of a company, as a business leader, I fall into the reacting to everything, whether it's the ping on my phone, whether it's the knock at my door, whether it's the client or customer that walks in at that moment. I'm constantly reacting. And because I'm reacting, even if I plan out, okay, I'm going to do the laundry on, let's say, Friday afternoon, all of a sudden it gets crowded out by the urgent, but maybe not necessarily important, but it becomes kind of important and mostly urgent because I didn't plan for it.
Exactly. Well, it's the tyranny of the urgent and the whirlwind that gets us all. And, I talk about it in the book in terms of boundaries. And normally we talk about boundaries as far as social boundaries. But what I would say to that one, Jake, is if you make a plan, but then you don't set and hold the boundary that the plan needs to execute, then it's not so much a planning problem. It's a boundary maintenance problem. Right. And so when that person walks in the office, or when you get that notification or whatever that is, just saying, you know what? It's not the time or space for that right now. Can we reschedule this meeting? Can you come back in an hour? Can I shut off these notifications, or can it just wait? And unfortunately, Jake, and I'm sure this happens to you because it happens to me too, is like we realize midstream that we're working on something that we never should have prioritized in the first place. Like if we would have just given it a day, it would have either taken care of itself, or we would have been able to see that it's not really important. It seemed important because it was urgent, But just because something is urgent doesn't mean it's important. So yeah, I would say that's actually more of a boundary issue than it is a planning issue than it is anything else. And I think that's where people get confused, is they think they need to have better plans when sometimes you just need to have better boundaries.
And I think what you just talked about for the last 2 minutes right there is worth its weight in gold. I think you packed so much into there that I've got light bulbs poking all over at my head right now. This idea of boundary maintenance problems. I'd never heard it said that way before, but I'm thinking about it right now, and you're absolutely right. And I think this is a problem that many, many leaders have, and that is their boundaries get eroded. They allow things to creep in. They have interruption creep happen. And then what happens is their projects, or the things that are important that they've scheduled, that they've really placed as important, they get stuck. They don't move forward. So tell us, what do we need to do? We find ourselves in this situation. How do we break out of this?
So part of it is to be clear about and articulate your priorities to both yourself and your team. And so if they know what matters most for your business, and then you can reference like, hey, I'm working on this thing, or I'm focusing on this thing that we've all agreed is important, then it makes it easier to maintain that boundary, because that person in that moment that's interrupting you knows that for them to continue to do what they're doing, they're going to displace something that may be more important. And so first is articulate and communicate your priorities. The second is and it's not so much a strategy as much as it is just the simple doing what you know you need to do when someone's knocking on the door or calling, letting them know that they need to reschedule. And so it's basically learning to say no or not now. Not now because. And I think the third thing that I would say here is make your defaults instead of if someone has a request of you, the default many of us have is yes. Make it no unless it trumps whatever else you're currently working on.
That's a great way to look at it. But I want to go back to the second example that you gave, and I want to ask it, and we see this in business, and we see this in our personal lives. I have kids, and what I'm seeing is this growing generation, this growing culture of impatience. And I think that's where the boundaries are starting to get eroded, in that everybody around us has this expectation that my problem, my question, my need has to be fulfilled this moment. And I had this conversation with my daughter this morning as we were driving to school, as we were talking about, she said, well, we won't be able to do that for her sister because she has this need. And I kind of threw it back to her and I said, yeah, but what if we allowed her need, her sister's need, to trump hers, the one that I was talking to? And I think this is kind of an interesting thing to look at, as you mentioned. How do we combat this growing societal impatience where everybody demands immediate fulfillment of the question or a solution to what they're asking?
Part of it is just to stop the assumption that that's the norm. So, Jake, you're probably old enough to remember when people used to call our houses and maybe leave a voicemail on the phone, and you may get back to that voicemail message in 2 to 4 days, right? There wasn't this idea that you call someone or you text someone and that's an urgent, immediate response. And somewhere along the way, we've agreed to that. Somewhere along the way, we've set that precedent. And trust me, we can set a different precedent. And so, learning to have your team put some of their ideas and projects on ice. Like, okay, you've got a great idea. We'll talk about that next week at our Scrum meeting. We'll talk about that next week at our new project meeting.
And this isn't going to change overnight. I mean, when we're talking to our staff, it's going to take multiple attempts at this for them to be reconditioned to understanding that, hey, my need, while important, is not urgent, and therefore it can wait for the next week, even though deep down inside and everything else that I'm doing and all the rest of my life, 99% of my life, my immediate needs are being fulfilled. But when I talk to my boss and when I'm at work, I recognize that it needs to be delayed until the next staff meeting or until the next opportune moment.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to zag on this conversation, Jake, because I think as leaders, we often think about what our teams need to do. But what I would say is we are the wheel of change, and learning to communicate with our teams like, hey, I've got an idea. You don't need to work on this for the next 3 or 4 days. I don't need a response from this until next week. I'm just seeding this idea so you're thinking about it. We have to get into that practice first Because if we expect them to to hold their boundaries and appreciate our boundaries, we need to recognize that we can't be, the boundary, dominator around, and just like everything we want is instantaneous, because that is partially why we're in this situation.
Well, I can hear the philosopher in you coming out. You clearly have studied this philosophical thinking. But I ask you now, as we start to implement this in reality, we're moving so quickly. Business is moving so quickly now that how do we stop? I can just imagine if I had a boss that said to me, hey, Jake, here's an idea that I have. I don't want you to do anything on it for a couple of days. I understand you're working on projects A, B, and C, but I want you to know that coming up in a couple of days, we want to focus on D. I don't know that I could turn off D. I'm already working and thinking and focused on it. And so how do we stop ourselves from being distracted and chasing the new shiny object?
So part of it is I want to make the difference between motion and progress. And yes, businesses and teams are busier than ever. We're more active, but are we actually progressing faster? Right. And that's a question that I think sometimes we don't grapple with enough. And so very tactically, Jake, maybe you're right that seeding an idea actually, because maybe you have overfocused or ADHD teammates that just can't let it go. Maybe you just have a weekly meeting to where new ideas are discussed and decided on and vetted and put into a parking lot. And that's just the place where projects go. And we develop that discipline to not always interrupt a coworker who's working on something. Like, hey, I've got this thing that I want you to think about. Why are we doing that if they're not going to be working on it, right? And so again, part of it is putting on the brakes of this whirlwind and this motion, and not being that rocking chair that's, doing a lot of movement but not actually getting anywhere, and saying, you know what? When are better times for us to have actual decision meetings? Is it once a week where we need to decide on priorities for the week following? Or, how do we make this more constructive so that we do bring down this decision fatigue, so that we do pull down this cognitive overwhelm, and so that we do pull down this idea that everything has to be instant and right now, because everything that's instant and right now typically is not letting us do our best work, and we're not getting the best results from our team.
Yeah, and I had this experience yesterday. I was working with a lawyer, and we were going through marketing ideas. And we came up, it was one of those kind of spaghetti against the wall moments where we were just throwing everything against the wall, seeing what stuck. And we got a lot of ideas. We just brainstormed a ton of ideas, more than any one company, one business, one person could implement. And so what we discussed doing is taking like a shoebox, taking each of those ideas, throwing them in the shoebox, stuffing them under the bed, and then quarterly pulling that out, going through each of those little slips of ideas and determining what 1 to 3 were going to be our focus for the next quarter. And that was kind of my response, my direction taking this lawyer. And I wanted to get your thoughts on if that was a good idea and maybe how could I have made that better?
I think it's a brilliant idea. I love idea gardens. I love idea jars where you just put something in there and then you review it frequently enough to keep it going. But what we have is under action and, we have over action and under real execution, meaning that we kind of half try a bunch of things, but we don't have rigorous execution on a few things. And so you're far better off in that scenario if you came up with 92 different things saying, you know what, and I'm going to use some of my own work from the book here, let's think about some of these ideas. Some of these ideas are going to be week-long campaigns. Some of them are going to be month-long campaigns. Some of them are going to be longer campaigns. But what are the no more than 3 to 5 ideas that we can execute on right now and do it deeply and put the others in a shoebox, and we'll execute these. When we're through these, then we'll go back to that box and say, hey, what are we doing? Because the reality is we forget sometimes in business that the next project we do should be strategically more valuable than what we're currently doing. Otherwise, we should just do what we're continuing to do and doing it better. But we just jump from thing to thing to thing without being able to do that full assessment of saying, hey, these ideas that we have, how are they going to be better than what we're currently doing? How do we flesh that out so that we're not just jumping from thing to thing to thing?
Yeah, and I know your book is called Start Finishing, but based on just that response there, I want to take you back even to the starting question. And I think that's kind of where this whole conversation begins, is how do we go from idea to the beginning steps of execution so that we can get to the point where we're finishing?
So that's a really broad thing, but I think we don't spend nearly enough time thinking about how our goals are aligned with our priorities. And so we go from idea to working on it, not idea to, oh, that's a great idea. How does it fit in with our priorities? Oh, it does fit. Oh, let's make a better goal around that so that we know what success looks like and what level of success we're going after. And so, and then you sort of work through that. Once you have sort of that goal, you can start to think about the group of people you're going to bring around it. I call it a success pack that will help you power that goal. And then, and only then, is when you actually start the planning and the scheduling and the prioritization and all those sort of things. But again, we go from, oh, that's a great idea to we're working on it. And then we realize midstream. So for those of us who are hyper creative, I actually don't think we need to start nearly as many things, right? I actually think we need to put about 80% of our ideas on ice and put them in an idea garden. And the ones that are really great, they won't go away. You got to trust me on that. They're not going to go anywhere. But a lot of the ones that are basically just bright, shiny objects, they will fall away and not distract and disrupt your team from being able to execute on those really powerful ideas. Those really ones that are going to change the face of your business and change what their careers look like. Those are the ones we need to be working on. So as sort of a funny sort of play on this, like part of the point of start finishing is actually to stop starting and let things go and focus on a smaller set of things that matter more and do that extremely well than do a bunch of things spaghetti against the wall, to use your sort of thing, and hope that they work out. And what we do, and we do that, Jake, is unfortunately, I think we hedge too many bets. We do a bunch of projects in case those projects don't work out, but we never really invest our full capacity into any one of those projects, so they don't work out.
Well, and I think the reason that people do that, hedge their bet, is the whole concept and idea, and maybe it's erroneous, of the don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? And so that's kind of the flip side of what we're talking about here, is people have swung the pendulum too far away, that we're so afraid that if we put all our eggs in one basket and we drop the basket, that we're out. That we've swung all the way back the other way, where now we have so many different ideas that we just don't execute on them. And for me, one of the big key topics and takeaways from this is there's a difference between ideas and planning. Ideas may be the starting point, but a plan is where you put together the action steps to move the momentum needle forward. Now, one of the things that you brought up, and I wanted to ask you about it, is this idea of success packs and surrounding yourself with the right people and resources in order to accomplish your goal. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so success packs are the group of yay-sayers that you bring around your project that help power it going forward. So there are 4 types of people that you want to put on the success pack. And I'm going to be brief here because I realize where we are in the call. But just briefly, guides are those Yodas, Morpheuses, those Gandalfs on the road that have a lot more time and speed, maybe some more accomplishment, and can help you see the world differently. And your main point of having guides is they help you see things differently. They don't do the work for you. They don't open doors like people think they do. It's basically helping you see. Then you have your peers, which are the people that are about your level of accomplishment, that are sort of your phone or friends. You put them on the team because of their brain. You have your supporters, which you put on your team because of their hands. They're the ones that actually do work on the project or do work for you that allows you to focus on the project. And perhaps the most important group, and the one that's most neglected, are the beneficiaries. And these are the people who benefit both from the process and outcome of you doing that work. And unfortunately, what we tend to do is we tend to seek more guides, when in reality, we need to be in better and closer relationships with our beneficiaries. These are our customers. These are our super fans. These are, all those people who are actually going to benefit from the project. And so rather than asking all these other people what we should do, what we should build, how we should serve, we should be asking the people that we're building for and whom we're trying to serve what works for them. And the goal here is for an individual. I'm not talking necessarily for a team, but for an individual to have 3 to 5 people from each of those sets around a project, because that creates 12 to 20 people that are rooting for you, that are seeing different aspects of the business, and it bakes in the accountability. Because once we commit to those people that we're going to do something, we can't hide from them, and that's 12 to 20 people that we need to be accountable for that project.
All right, Achievers, I hope you were paying attention. I hope you were listening because Charlie just told you in no uncertain terms why you got to go pick up this book. This is amazing stuff. And that was just a brief 1-minute description of these 4 types of people that come in your success pack and why you need to have them. It is that is throughout the entire book. All these great actionable ideas of how you can go from a starter, an idea person, to a finisher. And like Charlie said, know that sometimes to be a good finisher means to decide what is the best things to start. Charlie, at this point, it's time for us to switch gears just a little bit and go over to our Learning from Leaders section and find out a few of the answers to these questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. The first question that we have for you is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table. What are you reading these days?
Oh, so I think it's the Legacy Fleet series, which is a sci-fi novel. It's a sci-fi series that you can get from Amazon. So I'm really loving it. I think the author is Nick Webb. I think I'm on book 4 or 5. That's the trick sometimes with Kindle, is that I don't necessarily know the title of the book. I just know the sort of theme of the book I'm reading. But it is the Legacy Fleet series by Nick Webb. Great series.
And I'm a huge fan of the 2 things that you just said. Number 1 is the Kindle, and number 2 is series. I love to get into series and get to understand the people and the characters and their kind of quirks and decisions that they have to make, and then see them placed in so many different circumstances and situations. I think that comes from our television watching days where we see these same characters week after week doing different things. So I love this idea. Our second question then is your leadership superpower.
I think my team tells me it's this X-ray goggles, like I can see things that they can't see. And just being able to see that and articulate that and show our patterns can help us make better solutions around it. So if you can't see it, you can't beat it. And so I'm just able to see things.
Yeah, and I think that's a tremendous superpower. In fact, I'm thinking about my team and wondering how I can cultivate that superpower within some of them to see different things, because everybody brings a different background, a different experience, a different story, and they relate to our ideas, our products, our service in a different way. And so I love that superpower. Thank you for sharing it. Our next question, and this is going straight to a PhD in philosophy. What is a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra, something that you live by?
So this is probably my favorite quote, and it's from Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching. So you guessed right where this was going to go. And so I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's, he who conquers the world, I count as strong. He who conquers himself, I count as truly powerful.
Now tell me, what does that mean to you?
That means that most of this journey is not so much about trying to win in the world, but trying to understand who I am and my gifts and my flaws and really getting self-mastery. And the more that I focus on that, the more success accrues in the world as a byproduct.
You know, you're absolutely right about this. I've been listening to this podcast recently that's put on by a very famous Hollywood personality, somebody that everybody would know. And I love the podcast because he's so vulnerable. He shows us that even though, you know, he's got the fame, the money, the beautiful wife, he still has the struggles. And I think about this imposter syndrome, and everybody on the planet, from the most powerful individual to each one of us, we all struggle at times with this overcoming our self-doubt, and our own self-limiting beliefs. And so I love this idea of becoming powerful through conquering ourselves. So thank you for sharing that. Our final question then is the book that you recommend or most gift to friends, family, and colleagues.
This one's super tricky because I'm an avid reader, and I'm going to have to go with the 5 love languages. And it's an unexpected one, but so much of our happiness in life comes from being in rich relationships with other people and understanding that we all have ways in which we communicate what we need with each other. It's a really powerful book, so I just recommend it to everyone, because at the end of the day, like, you know, when we look at over the course of our lives, it ends up being the health of our relationships that matter most. So it's a great one to give people and tell them about.
Well, I love it. And the timing is perfect for me. This has been something that's on my mind a lot recently, is how to develop stronger personal relationships, not just business relationships. I feel like as I've gone through my career, I've focused really on my business relationships and I've done pretty good with that. But now I feel like I've neglected some of my personal relationships. So I love this idea of how by the end of my life can I look back and feel like I did what I needed to do to grow and nurture those relationships that are most important. So Charlie, this has been a great podcast. I love having you come on. Before we let you go, tell us, how can we pick up a copy of Start Finishing, and how can we find out more about you?
First off, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a great conversation. If you're interested in the book, go to startfinishingbook.com. That's all one word. You can get a sample chapter to see if it's for you. And if you're interested in the broader body of work that I have, you can find that at productiveflourishing.com.
Wonderful. We're going to throw both of those up on the show notes for this, so our listeners can go to one place and get it all. And I'm telling you, they need to get a copy of the book. I love it. It's got a great look and feel to it. I've got an advanced copy of it, so it's, an editor's version. So it looks a little bit different, and I love it because it's bigger and I can feel it in my hands. Charlie, you've been a great guest. Thank you for coming on and imparting with the Modern Leadership audience your wisdom. Thanks for being this week's guest expert.
Jake, it's been great.
All right, my friends, what did you think of that episode with Charlie? I sure appreciate him coming on. And I tell you, I love interviewing all of the guests that come on this show. I think all of the episodes that we do are a labor of love. It's a lot of fun. I'm bringing on people that really inspire me. The books that they write, the things that they're teaching are just amazing. But sometimes you feel a little bit of a connection with a guest. And I felt like this with Charlie. I thought he came on right at the right time for me, a topic that is fresh and in my mind a lot as I deal with a lot of my team and myself to get from idea to execution to completion. And so thank you, Charlie, for coming on and sharing your book, a great book, Start Finishing, How to Go From Idea to Done. You'll have to pick up a copy. Of course, everything that we talked about, links to it all is found on the show notes, jakeacarlson.com/ML167, episode 167. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And remember, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.